The Penguin episode 4 is out, and the show just keeps getting better. This episode is mostly a flashback episode, and the first thing that came to mind was, hey, Acolyte, this is how you do a flashback episode. This gives us a lot of context for why Sophia is the way that she is. And the actress who plays her, Kristen Milioti, kills this role and just dominates this episode. The Penguin is hardly in it at all, and it's still probably the best episode so far, which is kind of crazy when he's the title character, and he's also been killing it. And the real takeaway from this episode is that Oz wasn't really at fault for what happened to her, and that she got royally screwed over by her dad. So let's just get into it. The first part of the episode is a little mini flashback before the main one. So we get to see what happened right before Victor came up and broke up them getting killed with his car. And we get to see that Sophia found out that Oz was the one that killed her brother, because the Maroney wife reveals it to her. And she sees that Oz was playing both sides the whole time, and that she knew that she shouldn't trust him. So after Victor breaks things up by hitting that guy, she manages to escape, and it's kind of chaotic. We see Penguin take one of the guys out because he shoots him, so everybody's just kind of scrambling. And she calls her doctor, who we saw a couple episodes ago, that I said I'm sure he's a villain because he has a fucking porn stash. And this episode, I would say 90% confirms that. It's a little more complicated, but I would still say that I was right. So she passes out after she calls him. And then that's where the real flashback starts for the bulk of the episode. So when it starts off, she's very young. This is obviously over 10 years ago because she was in Arkham for 10. And she's giving a speech kind of to bring funding and awareness to depression, that sort of thing. Because when she was a kid, she walked in on her mom who had hanged herself. And you can see even her hair and her whole demeanor is completely different. She's managed to take the crazy out of her eyes. And frankly, this episode is making me feel like I can fix her. So a reporter comes to talk to her, and the reporter is essentially accusing her indirectly of knowing what's going on with these women who are dead, because all of them were hanged, and we're going to find out in a little bit why this reporter is suspicious. But we see Sophia be like, no, I don't want to talk to a reporter, that's inappropriate. And then Oz is her driver, and he's like, come on, leave her alone, to the reporter. So he is standing up for her at this point. And there's a really interesting scene here where she's talking to her dad and brother at dinner, and the brother's messing stuff up, and the dad's kind of laying into him, and then he runs off. We know he's a partier, drugs, drinking, women. And the dad says to Sophia, how would you like to become the head of the family? And he doesn't care that she's a woman. She'd be the first one to do it. And Carmine Falcone is played by Mark Strong. You've probably seen him in a bunch of stuff. He's usually bald though, but he does a really good job being kind of like the menacing mobster boss, because Sophia starts asking about her mom, and something about it just doesn't seem right to her. And she's kind of like, was mom ever sick? I don't remember seeing her ever emotional or depressed or blah, blah, blah. And the dad's like, why are you bringing up old wounds? And what we're going to find out in a couple of minutes here is that he's the one that killed her. Not a huge surprise, but this is all setting up the whole hangman thing. So she tries to ask the brother about it, just kind of what he remembers and kind of feel him out. And maybe the dad has told him stuff that she doesn't know. And he's like, oh, you're thinking too much. It was a long time ago, blah, blah, blah. And he kind of just brushes her off. It's not a big deal. So she agrees to meet up with the reporter again. And the reporter's like, look, these women look like they were strangled before they were hanged. And you can see they have broken nails. They've been fighting back. They're self-defense wounds. And what she's pretty straightforwardly implying is that her dad is somehow involved with these women dying, because a lot of them worked in his clubs or whatever. So she's trying to get access to like the VIP area. And Sophia's kind of in denial, but you can tell that she also is trying to stand up for her dad because she loves her family, and at the same time realizes that he's probably involved somehow, directly or indirectly. And we get this little flashback of when she found her mom hanging, and the dad's like, oh, no. And he picks her up, and then she takes off his glasses, and we get a quick little glimpse here where I paused it, and you can see the fingernail marks in his hands where the wife had fought back when he strangled her to death. And we find out later that Sophia did notice this and kind of repressed it. So Sophia eventually gets defensive and is like, you're accusing my family, blah, blah, blah. And she ends up leaving, even though she clearly has doubts. And Oz is like, don't let her get to you. That's how reporters work. They just try to get under your skin and needle you, make you start questioning everything. So we see here that Oz is actually inside the party and not just waiting in the car. And he's got a new jacket on. So he's clearly moved up a little bit in status. And what we find out right here is that Oz told Carmine, hey, Sophia's meeting with a reporter. You should talk to her. So Carmine calls her into his office and is like, you should know better than talk to the press. I'm being investigated for murder. He's blaming her for him being investigated because there's an open investigation that's being looked into. So he grills her and is like, do you think I did these things? And she's like, no, I never doubted you. But she's obviously visibly upset. And she does a fucking great job here because you can tell how conflicted she is, where she's like obviously suspecting him, but also doesn't want to believe it. And she conveys that really well in this scene. And then she fucks up because she says, I'm sure there's some kind of explanation. And he says, for what? And she goes, you had cuts on your hands that day. So now we know that she noticed, and the dad knows also. Super intense scene, really well done. So he starts saying things like, oh, you're confused, something's off, you need to leave before you make a scene. And he's like laying the groundwork for obviously everyone thinking she's crazy as shit, which we already know from the future, everyone does think she's insane. And then her and Oz have a big fight leaving the party because she's like, I trusted you. Obviously, he was the only person there, and he told on her. And she was like, you should have come to me if you had an issue. So it's interesting because I think Oz does come across sort of getting a little bit of blame, but at the same time, he really didn't do anything, or certainly not anything that warranted what ends up happening to her. So they get pulled over like right away. She gets arrested, and she's getting charged with the murder of the reporter and then the open investigation that her dad was accused of. So we can see that her dad framed her. A really fucked up backstory. And I think it makes her character really interesting that she actually was innocent and then became crazy in Arkham, which is what we see this episode. And here Oz actually doesn't know what's going on. And he's like, Kenzie, what the fuck? Again, just establishing that world building a little bit more of how corrupt Gotham actually is. Not that we didn't already know that Falcone was buying the cops off. And then we see the rest of the episode where he is clearly just pulling the strings behind everything because of how much influence that he has. So now, not only did her dad fuck her over, there's letters of testimony from every person in the family that she's always been mentally unstable and crazy. And now she gets locked up for 6 months in Arkham to essentially be quote unquote analyzed to see if she's actually crazy or if she is a murderer who's of sound mind. So her backstory is just completely fucked. Really good villain backstory. So she gets taken away 6 months, isolation, no contact with anyone from the outside. And you can see the dehumanization right away. They strip her down, they're hosing her, they're scrubbing her really roughly. And all of this is obviously deliberate to break her down mentally and make it appear that she's actually crazy and to try to gaslight her as much as possible to drive her crazy and to essentially torture her. So her whole family has just completely fucked her over. And her brother is the only one that believes in her. So now we also know why she has a relationship with him that she did and why she cared so much about him specifically. So now we see the doctors, also paid off by her dad, obviously. And Dr. Rush, who's the one that we've seen before, is taking part in all of this torture that goes on with her. And there's something about it that makes it interesting. And I think it still makes him a piece of shit, even though the show kind of tries to frame him as gray. I think he's a pretty shitty person. But obviously the psychiatrist's main purpose here is to both drive her crazy and report that she's crazy and that she should never be allowed out. So her cell neighbor unscrews a bolt and starts talking to her, and her name is Magpie. And she's like, oh, you're the Hangman, aren't you? So the Hangman nickname got started right away. And then obviously she's completely unhinged. And what it seems like is the hospital is giving her the bliss in return for harassing Sophia. So now she meets Magpie in person, and we see the guard give her the bliss, and we can just see how she's absolutely fucking insane. And I'm not generally a fan of like the overly crazy kind of acting type thing, but she doesn't have that much screen time, so I think it works. And given that they're in Arkham, you can kind of live with it. We see this chick who was staring at Sophia when she was brought to her cell, and then she walks in the cafeteria and she's the only one unchained and just kicks the shit out of Sophia. And this is the beginning of them trying to gaslight her into believing that she's crazy and trying to twist her words and manipulate her. Really fucked up stuff, but really well executed. So Dr. Rush comes in, and he's like, I heard you had an incident. And she's like, yeah, had an incident. She beat the shit out of me while everyone just watched. And then she asked if someone let her out of her restraints, essentially to beat her up intentionally. And he immediately goes, oh, is that what you believe? So right away, trying to twist her words, manipulate her into being a piece of shit. And I think you're supposed to find him like complicated and somewhat redeemable. I don't. Like if he thinks this would be okay if she was guilty, why the fuck does it matter? Because later on, he asked Dr. Ventress, who's the head doctor, what if she actually didn't do it? So he's like skeptical that she was actually the Hangman. And we find out that he leaves the hospital eventually because he doesn't like what they were doing to her. But still, the fact that he's okay with torturing a patient like this because he thinks they're a serial killer, he's a piece of shit. But that's not his job as a doctor. So I don't find him redeemable. And she explains that she's there because her dad framed her and wants to keep her quiet. And he's like, so you think your dad framed you for murder? He clearly doesn't believe her. And he says that he just wants to help her, which doesn't seem to be the case to me. So they bring Sophia to the cafeteria with the girl who beat her up chained up, and Sophia's not chained up, and they give her a fork, obviously trying to goad her into being violent so they can make her look violent and mentally unstable. And she figures it out, which I like because she's not a stupid character, and then tries to get out of the situation, but obviously it doesn't matter. So she refuses to attack the chick, and the chick and her end up scrambling a little bit, and the crazy chick gets a hold of the fork and then just says, "Please end it," and stabs herself in the throat. And then obviously the torture of Sophia begins, as she's the one seemingly who gets blamed for this. So the torture starts, they're electrocuting her, and the guy that is supposed to be, I guess, the redeemable one, Dr. Rush, is the one turning the knob and doing it. Again, I don't find him very likable if that's supposed to be what they're going for. And the music during these scenes is really fucking stress inducing. So whoever the composer was did a great job with the music and the soundtrack, because it's been on point every episode, even though I don't usually mention it. And during this part in particular, it really puts you on edge. So we just keep seeing her pleading that she's innocent, getting tortured, and then them trying to drive her crazy. And we see when Dr. Rush is strapping her down, she squeezes his hand and she just shakes her head no. And she looks really rough right now, obviously. And this is the point where it seems like Dr. Rush kind of switches to thinking maybe she's actually not crazy and we're doing something really fucked up to an innocent person. So the wallpaper thing was in her head because we see that she thinks that her mom is hanging in her room and she's envisioning herself in the room, and she goes to touch the body and it's her hanging. So then she starts freaking out and clawing at her neck, and now we know why she has those marks around her neck. It's really nice that all of that stuff that was hinted at, that the setup was actually worth it when we see it, and it wasn't just some dumb shit like we got in the Acolyte where nothing makes any fucking sense. So her brother comes, he's like, "You're not getting out even though it's been 6 months. Your doctor says you're not fit to stand trial. The judge agreed, so now you're just staying here." He's getting pretty emotional. He's like, "Just tell me what to do and I'll do it." And this is the thing that obviously makes her completely fucking snap. And you can see how rough she looks. And this is the part where she just kind of goes over the edge. But even here, she's like, Dr. Rush wouldn't do that. And her brother's like, "No, it's Ventress." So you can see that like she puts her faith in Dr. Rush, even though I still think he's an asshole. But from her perspective, he was the only person in there who really gave her any hope of getting out. Again, Sophia's actress killing it here. Dr. Rush tries to apologize, and he's like, "I didn't know that he was going to write the report like that. I tried to stop him." And then she puts together that Magpie was trying to get information out of her and connected to Ventress for the bliss, and she just fucking smashes her head on the table to death and just goes completely fucking crazy. It's really well done and a really awesome moment for the episode just because of how built up it was that she finally just fucking snaps. So she wakes up in Dr. Rush's house. He gives her clothes and she's at his place, and she's regretting that she trusted Penguin for obvious reasons. And she's really just pissed off at herself more than anything because she's like, "I should have known better." And now she knows the truth about her brother. So she explains that she needs to be on a plane to Sicily or her family's going to kill her. And he's like, "Maybe that'd be the best thing for you to do for yourself. You've only been out of Arkham a few weeks. It might be good to get a fresh start somewhere." And she's questioning his motives. And she's like, "You miss how it was back in Arkham, don't you? The control you had over me. And I saw the way that you looked at me." And he kind of tries to blow it off, but you can tell he's irritated. And he does say that he feels guilty for what happened, and that's kind of why he's doing this. But I still think he's a piece of shit. So she's just kind of railing about how the men in her life have treated her. And this is one of those things that if you're hypersensitive to culture war type shit, you might think it's annoying. I think it kind of fits her character. Oz fucked her over. Her dad fucked her over. The doctors fucked her over. It makes sense to me that she'd be pretty bitter. And I also do like this aspect of her calling him out for taking drugs because he feels guilty. And then she's also using her looks to essentially to emotionally manipulate him and kind of get what she wants. And you can tell how awkward he is right here, that he's obviously attracted to her and she's using that against him. So she shows up at this family get together and you can see the scars on her shoulders and her neck because she's finally wearing something exposing. She's being kind of obnoxious, and Luca goes to give a speech and she cuts him off. And Vidi tries to say something and she just looks at him like, "Do you want me to call you out for fucking his wife right here?" It's pretty amusing. And she's got like chewed up food coming out of her mouth and she's just being a real dick. And then she fills her whole wine glass and gives a speech about how they all turned their back on her as soon as they were asked to, and pretty much just how much of pieces of shit they are. And then she leaves. And the fact that no one responds to this, I think is kind of crazy, considering they know that she's unstable now, even if she wasn't before, and they pay for it this episode. She does a really good job throughout this whole episode of her emotions just progressively getting more and more unhinged. And when she turns it on to being crazy, she just plays it so well. It's really fun to watch. And also seeing her in this dress, I think I could fix her. So she takes, I think it's her cousin Carla's daughter, out to the greenhouse. And she's like, "Why don't we stay out here for the night?" And you can tell she's up to something, but we don't know what. And the girl says, "Mommy told me not to be around you, that you were bad." And then she asks why she's bad. And she says, well, I was in a place that I was surrounded by monsters and I had to defend myself, which is a pretty interesting answer for her to give to a little kid. You can tell that she's kind to her because she's a child, despite her mother being a giant cunt to her. So they sleep out in the greenhouse. And then obviously the next morning, you see what she was up to. So we see her with a gas mask on and letting a bunch of this gas out through the house. I thought it was carbon monoxide because that would just kill them all. But then we see that they're not dead. So I'm actually not sure what type of gas it was. But you can see she's walking through the house. They're all fucked up, just passed out on the floor. And the episode ends with her waking up Vidi and holding a pistol to him. So I can't wait for next week. The show just keeps getting better. And it was great to get the full backstory for her and see why she is the way that she is. And it actually made sense. It was very satisfactory for a background. All things that the Acolyte did not do and could not do in its wildest dreams. And yeah, the actress, each week I keep saying a different person steals the show. And that's a great fucking problem to have. She killed this episode. She was awesome. So I'm going to leave it there for this one. If you're caught up and you've seen it, let me know what you think. I try to respond to all the comments that aren't just insults. If for some reason you watch this video but haven't seen the show, go watch it. It's really good. But yeah, like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.